Welcome back to the channel. So last week, if you were here, we started our big tutorials on baguette making. If you've missed the episode, link on the screen and in the video description. So last week what we've talked about the theory, the techniques, how to make the dough, the rolling, the preparation, and we've cooked a standard baguette using supermarket ingredient. This week, in this episode, as I said, we're gonna be using more the professional types of stuff, mainly the flours, specific French flours, and we're going to be talking in this episode also about flours in general, the different types of flour you can find, which one to use, and can flour actually improve your breads at home? Okay, once we've talked about this, we'll do a demonstration where I'm going to be cooking 2 baguettes with 2 different types of flour and see the difference, of course, with a big testing session, see how it goes, the opening, etc., all coming up. So as I just said, flour is going to be the big subject of that video because as easy as it sounds, there's more than meets the eyes when it comes to flour. So I'd like to start the video by saying thank you to Greg Bowen, someone that follows the channel, that sent me an address for that shop, basicingredients.com. It's located in Australia, and these guys are doing a great job importing flour from Italy. As you can see, we've got Italian flours, French flour, and there's even German flour. So Greg was always telling me, oh, did you order already? So, yes, I did, and thanks, because I was able to do that video because of that, and highly recommend it if you're into that baking, bread making, because they got plenty of stuff. It is really good. So remember, basic ingredients, it's not affiliated, I bought all of that, but I wanted to show you this. Now, flour, very simple. You have it at home, but actually the first thing we're going to start to talk about is exactly where it comes from, how it's made, and then we're going to go into the granular details and talking about the different types of flour in different countries. So let's start by quoting the obvious and talk about wheat. It's called blé in French, and this is what you see on the screen. I'm sure you've seen this before, and this is where flour is coming from. So how does it go about? Very simple process, as you can see on the screen. The seed is planted, it grows, you get the wheat, it is then harvested, and then it is going through a mill, transformed into flour, and you've got this in bags. What we've seen last week, when you got the bag of flour, where you just use it, you add some water, some yeast, some salt, you put it in the kneading machine, you prepare the dough by hand, etc. You cook it, and then boom, you've got the baguettes or your bread coming on the shelf in your local boulangerie or bakery. And when you first see this, you think, well, this is pretty straightforward. I just need some flour and I'm done. I can make bread, I can do all sorts of things. But when you start to dive into the subject of flour, things can get a little bit more confusing than you ever imagine. So let me show you what I mean. So here we are, back to our selection of white flour, and white flour is the type of flour we're going to be talking about, just the main type of flour you use at home to make cakes, to make tarts, pizza and breads, and this is the common stuff. And when you go to a shop, you see this, white flour. You can see all-purpose flour, sometimes bread flour, cake flour, that sort of things. But if you look at French stuff, for instance, look at this. They all look the same. This one is T55, T65 tradition, T65 Compayet. You go to Italy, you got the same kind of logo, looks the same, different color, the Classica, the Cuoco, and the type, both of them are 00 type of flour. They look exactly the same. So how do you get your head around this? The easiest way I found is to look at this diagram. This is a grain of wheat. And there's basically 3 components that are important. And this is the 3 properties, I would say, for the flour. So let's start with what's called here the envelope. The son in French, in English it's called the bran, B-R-A-N. If you think of a hazelnut, it is like the skin. That skin is going to bring the color in your flour. If you think of a wholemeal flour, it's going to have all these particles, these bran particles, that's coming from that. But also it's going to bring taste, because in that skin reside all the minerals, all the vitamins, and that really can change a little bit the texture and the taste of your flour. The inside of the wheat, the almond, which is like, imagine the inside of a hazelnut, if you grind it, you get that pristine white color. And this is where the white of the flour comes from. So if you want something that is pure and fine and without any particles. You get rid as much as you can of the outer layer, and you keep just the inside to have a very ultra fine flour that is usually preferred to make cakes. Okay? Well, wholemeal, it is usually good for these special breads. You know, when you get these very healthy breads, they got plenty of skin and mixed with the white, so it's a good balance of mineral and taste, etc., etc. The third element you don't really see on here is the amount of protein, aka the gluten that is contained. It is inherent to the wheat, but it can be modified afterwards. Some flours, for specialty bakers, they can add different amounts of gluten, and there is a fourth level that will come into play. This is how it's defined, how strong your flour is, how much gluten does it have in. So what is the incidence of the gluten? The gluten is basically that stretchiness you get in your dough. So when you make the bread, the more gluten you have, the better it is at stretching. So when you make a pizza or any type of dough that is fermented, you want to have a good amount of gluten because you're going to get something that is really nice and stretchy. It's going to capture the gas, the bubbles of air, etc., etc. So in a nutshell, think of these three components because they are really the key to everything. So how exactly do we know what flour do we need to use, what's best for bread, what's best for baking, etc., etc.? Based on what we've seen, the most important things are the three criteria I gave you: the outer shell, vitamin and minerals and taste, see it as that; the inner core, the almond, is giving you the pure white flour, and it's also giving you the amount of gluten in your flour. Okay. If we look at the French system, we've got this Tnumber classification. It's called the taux de cendre, meaning the ash level. I'm not going to go into this. You can look it up. I'll put the name on the screen. But let's call it, for this explanation here, let's call it the type of flour. The numbers go from T45, which I don't have. Actually, this is why I've got this one. This is the T45, all the way to T110. What does it mean? The lower the number, so the T45, has got the least amount of mineral and vitamin, aka that outer shell is almost totally removed. You end up with a super fine, super white type of flour. This is the preferred type of flour for baking, sometimes referred to as the cake flour. When you go up the scale, we're going to have 55, which is the all-purpose type of flour. It's got a little bit, a good balance of that outer shell, not too much taste, and if you go up, you start to venture into the more traditional known in other countries as the bread flour, the specialty flours that can have different types of flour. We've got a wheat flour mixed with malted flour, and you can see pigmentation, and this is why we've got denomination here, tradition, compayet, because there's different things in it, and the taste, the color is gonna vary. If you go after T65, you're gonna enter the wholemeal type of flour. Okay, so it's very, keep it at this. The T45, the lower the number, the whiter the flour is, the bigger the number, the more browner it becomes. So the color and taste is great. You're gonna have a wholemeal flour, a white flour, it's gonna be thin, the other one's gonna add more particle, and it's gonna have more taste, so that's all good. But in bread making, the most important is the protein level, aka the gluten. You want something stretchy because it has to be a fermented type of dough. And this number in France tells us another thing, is the amount of protein or gluten that sits in the flour. The lower the number, the larger the amount of gluten. Why is this? Because the gluten sits in the inner core of the wheat. So if you remove all of the shells, you're going to have a high level of gluten. And this is the case with the T45 flour. Pristine white because you got rid of the shell, but lots of gluten because it is mainly made with the inner core of the wheat. And you may think, well, this is great. For bread, it's perfect. I'm going to use the T45. And yet, this is the preferred flour only to make cakes, referred to as the cake flour. And when I looked at it, I was like, what? It doesn't make sense at all. Why is this? Well, this is coming down to the water absorption level. The T45 is preferred for any types of dough that is non-fermented, non-kneaded. So you don't really care about the gluten, but the good thing about it is that the water absorption is very low. So when you make a crepe batter, for instance, when you make a cake batter or any cake, it's gonna kind of really not absorb too much more water, and you're gonna have something nice and moist. And it's also very, very thin. There's no extra particles, so it holds very well. This is why it's preferred for cakes. But water absorption, you want some water absorption for your bread. So when you make bread, it really starts here. This is what it's called bread flour. The T55 is the equivalent of the all-purpose flour that you find in all the shops. It's got the good absorption level. It's enough to make a bread, enough to make a cake, and it's got enough gluten in there so that it's stretchy enough so that you can use some yeast and you're going to have a decent result. Now, of course, if you want more taste, you're going to have to go with these other types of flour, knowing that you're going to lose some of that gluten because you have more of the outer shell, and this is where the problem can start. Because when you use this specialty type of flour, the more you go wholemeal, remember the bread is becoming denser and denser, and it is harder to get it to rise. And this is why a lot of time for the tradition, the comparative and other types of bread, there is a sourdough starter that is used mixed with dry yeast, because you're trying to boost that kind of yeasty aspect to force that dough to rise and bubble up. Okay, so it's a fine balance of finding, okay, how can you have the taste, the nice color, the healthiness of the bread, but not ending up with a brick. You know, like think of rye bread, you know, that's like super heavy. So this is where you need to play. So what we're going to do here, without going into too much detail, we're going to be using these two here. I'm going to be using the plain all-purpose bread flour, so it's called bread specialty baker. And I'm going to make another baguette with this one, which is the tradition with two types of flour in there, and see, using the same technique as last week, how do they compare? What kind of result are we going to get when we cook them? Now, I also have this other one, which is the same type, but you see it's different wheat flour. This one has got like deactivated and dehydrated rye sourdough in it. I'm not even sure that I haven't tasted that, but we're just going to concentrate on these two because I want you to see what is the difference with a flour that is like, you know, it's got a good amount of gluten but not too much taste, how easy it's going to be to use and raise and ferment, compared to this one that is a heavier, this is what it's called in France, a heavy type of flour, meaning it's heavy in weight, so it doesn't raise as much, but we should have more taste in there. But I'm curious to see the difference. So I'm gonna skip the whole thing from last week. I'm not gonna show you how to make the dough and everything. There's one or two things I want to show you and touch base that I've talked about last week, but I didn't explain properly. But we're gonna mostly concentrate after that on you know, the cooking, the tasting, and look at the difference of these two baguettes. All right, so we've made the test. I've made two batch of dough for the baguette. This one is made with the T55, which is the plain vanilla white flour, all-purpose, but the baker style with lots of protein in it, meaning a good amount of gluten. And this is the easiest to work with, and the one that was really, as soon as you put yeast, it will grow. As you can see, there's bubble forming. It's very easy to use. The second batch, T65, this is for the baguette tradition, the old-fashioned style of baguette. Think more like wholemeal style of flour, but being reasonable, good amount of protein or gluten as well. And I think the difference you can see, because the high number, it is stated that the higher the number, the harder it is for the dough to grow back and inflate again. So you don't have that fermentation as much as this. This is much rounder. And this is more like flatter, like a brick. It looks a bit like an Italian ciabatta at the moment. But can we really see a difference? You know, when you buy the flour, you think, oh, this is going to change the type of bread. I'm not using the best technique of all, but it's very hard, I think, to see at that stage exactly what's going to transpire at the end with this. So what we're going to do, we're going to go for the motion again, leave this to rest. And when it's rested, we're going to shape the baguette. And of course, I think the cooking is really what's going to give us an indication of the difference. Okay, so it's been 30 minutes, a bit more, almost 40 minutes. You could leave it to rest for an hour, but what I'm realizing is that my dough is just drying at the top and it's getting more flatter than rounder. So I think it's going to be time to cook. So as always, we're going to sprinkle the baguette with flour. Now for the scoring. Now remember, once you start to making these slices, it has to be done just before you cook. And you make the scoring and boom, you cook. So my oven is ready. I've got the right temperature. I've got the water in there. ready for the steam. And one of the comments that I've seen as well, sorry about that, last time I think when I was doing the scoring I was doing it the wrong way. I was going this way to score. But a lot of you bakers and professionals told me, no, you have to go kind of along the sides of the baguette, and it's about 3 slices maximum. So what I'm going to do on here, I'm going to do 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3, and that should be it. And boom. In the oven, I'm going to cook these lovely baguettes, and we're going to see what difference these flours make. Okay, so the baguettes are ready, and something crazy happened with one of the baguettes. So let's have a look. Here they are. Okay, so that's the result. Let me see if we can see. So this is the flour T65, which is more the 2 types of flour mixed together. It's more that kind of more wholemeal, more heavy flour. It doesn't grow as much and as fast when you use your recipe with the same amount of yeast as the last time. As you can see, it's got some nice scoring face. It looks good. I'm not happy with this. I still don't have a baking stone, but that's a minor detail. This is the T55 one, the very light flour that inflates very, very well with the yeast, but when you cook it, it's even worse. Look at that. The baguette totally burst open where it was cooking. It's inflated like a balloon. Wow. I'm really happy because you can really see the difference between the 2 types of flour. And there's a beautiful smell. It's still extremely, extremely inviting. But I have to say that clear difference. That all-purpose one, very thin flour, I would reduce the amount of yeast because look at this. This is crazy. This went berserk in the oven. And same technique as last time. So I'm going to leave this to rest. And then, of course, let's break this open. Okay, so yes, I was meant to wait like a good 15 minutes, but honestly, I can't resist. So we're gonna fast forward. It's still a bit warm. Let me try because it's, look at, oh, it's a thin crust. Oh, okay, you know what? I can't. So should we eat more like, ooh, oh, it's nice and airy. Oh, it's pretty nice. I've got some butter here. This is a bit of salted butter because you got me started last time. Some people say, you know what, with a piece of salted butter, it would be good. So I'm going to try that like that. Oh. Absolutely, you can feel the butter. So interesting. So the crusts are really like the crust. You can read that French style when it's back in France, a nice crunchy. Yeah. But on the other hand, you know what? It's a perfectly good consistency. Nice bubbles of air in there. But it doesn't taste too special. Like it's really, as it says, it's a plain white flour with no complication. Works well for an everyday bread, but yeah, it just kind of tastes good, but I think it doesn't have too much soul to it. Now let's try the other one. Second one, the baguette tradition. Now the traditional, the T65 flour, there's 2 types of flour, much more solid, a big crunch, yeah. Yeah, smells good. You see? All right. And the first thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to try it like plain like this. Same kind of airy holes in there. Let's try. Oh yeah. That has definitely more body to it. Yeah. It's kind of denser. It's hard to explain. It's denser, not like it's really compact. It's denser, but the dough definitely has much more taste than the other one. This has got real character to it. Yeah. So I can understand the tradition, the type of bread. Wow. But we're gonna need something a bit more special to try this out. So let's see what we can do. Okay, so really interesting. So first thing I can say, the plain white is really the everyday thing. You're gonna have with a little bit of butter. You can use it in the morning. You can use it, you know, on the side of a soup or something. This is the rustic one, I think. So the first thing I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna cut a slice. Okay, and I'm gonna grab this, which is a pâté I've been making because I'm, you know, training on that new course on charcuterie. And I'm gonna slice a slice of pâté and put this on here. Let's see, let's zoom in. Okay, so for this final test, a rustic type of baguette has to go, of course, with a nice, so I've got a little piece of pâté, I've got a slice of bread, and, well, little piece, it's a good piece. Let's try. It's a good marriage. Yeah. All the herbs and the meats. Very, very well. Rustic and rustic, good combination. I like it. Yeah. Lovely. So, conclusion, after 2 episodes talking about bread, making bread, using different flour, what's the verdict? This is only my personal opinion. And I'm just going to be talking about the French style of flour that we've talked about. So you can see the one with the T number, the T45, T55, T65, and the specialty flour. Now, from what I've tried, I'm not a baker. With the few tests I've done, I've just scratched the surface, but I can see clearly now that the reason why France has got all these special breads and people love the bread lies in the types of flour you can get. From this small example, the flour you use has an impact, yes, on how it grows and stuff, but most importantly, the taste. This is what I can see with these two. This is a contrast that is absolutely huge. The plain, white, simple, everyday bread flour, nothing fancy. There's really, it's a neutral type of flour, neutral state. Yes, you make a bread, it looks good, but you eat it, it's just, yeah, it's all right, it's a bread. But as soon as you start to venture in new territories using a specialty flour, like here, la tradition, pour la baguette tradition, the traditional baguette, that mixes 2 types of flour. It's a bit more wholemeal. It's got some light residue that you don't even see. It's still considered a white flour. The taste is absolutely different. And this is one type of flour. Remember in the beginning, I've got another one, another T65 called Campaillette, which is going to yield another type of taste. And we have so many different flours, and that's what I think really makes the whole difference. Is the technique important? The rolling and things like that? This is something you're gonna learn by doing. It's not gonna change much at all. The yeast you're gonna be using, I think, if you use even those with dry yeast, you're fine. If you have more specialty flour that are more solid, like more heavy flour, you may want to mix the dry yeast, the sourdough starters. This is what the bakers are doing in France, the boulanger. But this is more in the advanced territory. But just, I think, at home, if you can go on a website and try some of this French flour and you are someone that makes bread at home, I can guarantee you that you're gonna see a huge amount in difference in the type of bread that you're gonna bring on the table. Because what I've tested here, that was night and day between these two. And that's just the beginning. I'm gonna keep on training in the background, behind the curtain, and see how I can go with my bread adventure. But that completes anyway that 2 series or that 2 episode series on bread making. I hope you've got now more information about bread, about the baguette, how to make them, and hopefully now the type of flour. And you know, if you have something specific you want to share, of course, use the comment section. If you want to venture and make some baguette, they're delicious, don't hesitate and share your picture on Instagram. And if you enjoy the show, as always, you can follow me, become a patron on my Patreon page. You can buy one of our courses with the later on coming courses on charcuterie is gonna come. We've got plenty of other courses. And of course, we've got the standard like Facebook. But that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed the show. I will see you next week. We're gonna resume the standard recipe videos with another special recipe on the French Cooking Academy. Take care all. Bye-bye.